If, in the most important moment of your life, the one who swore to wait for you at the altar vanished without a trace, would you collapse or turn the humiliation into a new beginning? The Presbyterian church bell counted 10 deliberate chimes as Clara Whitmore gathered her silk skirts and descended the wooden steps, each footfall echoing in the crisp October morning. Her ivory satin dress caught on a splinter. She freed it carefully. The marriage certificate in her beaded reticule felt heavier than the gold band she'd never worn. Millbrook, Colorado stretched before her 300 souls. Silver, nearly gone, but stubborn hope still dug deeper. Miss? A weathered voice interrupted her survey. Clara turned to find a man approaching, his worn boots crunching through fallen cottonwood leaves. He carried himself with the careful grace of someone long accustomed to watching his back, though his eyes held kindness. 2 children flanked him, a girl of perhaps 8 and a boy younger still, both studying Clara with the frank curiosity of youth. "I'm Thomas Garrett," the man continued, removing his hat to reveal prematurely grey hair. "These are my children, Sarah and Jacob. We were at the service." Clara's cheeks burned. Half the town had witnessed her humiliation, waiting as she'd waited, until Reverend Morrison's gentle suggestion that perhaps the groom had been delayed. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the whispered conversations had grown too loud to ignore, and Clara had dismissed the gathering with what dignity she could muster. "Mr. Garrett." She managed a curtsy despite her mortification. "I'm Clara Whitmore." "We know," said the girl Sarah with devastating directness. "Papa, she looks just like Sarah." Thomas's voice carried gentle warning, but his daughter continued, undeterred. "Like Mama in the daguerreotype. The one you keep in the kitchen drawer." Jacob nodded solemnly. "You got the same eyes." Clara felt heat rise in her throat. She'd traveled 800 miles to marry a man she'd never met, answering an advertisement placed in the Denver Post. "Prosperous mining engineer seeks refined lady for companionship and domestic harmony. Serious inquiries only." His letters had been proper, even courtly. His bank draft for travel expenses had cleared without question. Yet he'd never appeared. "I should return to the boarding house," Clara murmured, adjusting her grip on the small carpet bag that contained her few remaining possessions. Her small savings could never stretch far in a place where survival itself came at a premium. "Miss Whitmore." Thomas stepped closer, his hat still in his hands. "Might I speak plainly?" She nodded, though propriety suggested she should decline. "My children haven't had a mother's care in 2 years. I work the celestial mine 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts when the ore runs good. Mrs. Kowalski mines them for wages, but—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Sarah needs someone to teach her what a woman should know, and Jacob— well, a boy needs guidance I can't give. Mr. Garrett." "I'm not proposing marriage," he said quickly. "Not yet. But I've got a house, 4 rooms and a good stove. You could stay in Sarah's room, proper-like, and I'd pay fair wages for keeping house and minding the children. 50 cents a day, plus meals." Clara's arithmetic moved swiftly. $15 a month, more than enough to establish independence in a town where skilled teachers earned perhaps 20. The alternative, returning to Denver with empty pockets and ruined reputation, held no appeal. "Show me," she said. Sarah clapped her hands. Jacob grinned. Thomas's smile transformed his weathered face. "The house is on Prospect Street. 2 blocks from the school, if you're interested in teaching eventual." They passed Millbrook's small downtown shops, saloons, and the steam-scented Chinese laundry. Her mental ledger showed promise, if not prosperity. The Garrett house proved solid pine logs chinked with mountain clay, a stone foundation, and windows that caught afternoon light. Inside, Clara found evidence of motherless children. Dishes stacked haphazardly, clothing that needed mending, floors that begged for scrubbing. But the bones were good, sturdy furniture, a cookstove that radiated warmth, and books on every available surface. "Mama loved to read," Sarah explained, running small fingers along leather spines. "Papa keeps buying them, but he falls asleep in his chair most nights." Thomas colored. The mind takes its toll. Clara lifted a volume Tennyson's collected works and found pressed wildflowers between its pages. A woman's touch, preserved in petals and verse. She felt suddenly intrusive, as if she'd opened someone else's private correspondence. "I'll need references," she said, though the decision was already made. And an agreement in writing, terms clearly stated. "Reverend Morrison can vouch for my character," Thomas replied. "As can Mr. Chen at the laundry. I've done carpentry for him. And Judge Fairfax, if you want legal standing." The mention of law sparked Clara's interest. Her father had been a clerk in Street Lewis, and she'd learned enough about contracts to protect herself. "Then we'll draw papers properly. Room, board, and wages in exchange for domestic services and child supervision." Nothing more implied. Nothing more, Thomas agreed, though something in his voice suggested he hoped for eventual complications. As the church bell tolled 4 o'clock, Clara Whitmore accepted her first employment in Millbrook, Colorado. The abandoned bride in white would become something else entirely, though what, she couldn't yet imagine. The last rays of October sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows that reached toward tomorrow. The morning bell at the Celestial Mine rang 5 times as Clara tied her apron and surveyed her new domain. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and the Garrett household had begun to show signs of feminine influence. The dishes gleamed in their proper places, Sarah's dresses hung mended and pressed, and the floors bore the evidence of thorough scrubbing. Thomas had left before dawn, his lunch pail filled with cornbread and coffee, his mining lamp freshly cleaned. Clara had watched from the kitchen window as he walked toward the mountain, joining the stream of men who disappeared each morning into the earth's dark places. "Miss Clara?" Sarah appeared at her elbow, hair neatly braided, another of Clara's innovations. "Jacob won't put on his good shirt for school. Then he'll attend in his everyday clothes and explain to Miss Peterson why he chose to look slovenly." Clara had learned quickly that idle threats held no power over Thomas's children. Consequences, however, proved remarkably effective. Jacob appeared within minutes, properly dressed and scowling. "It's scratchy, it's clean. Education requires appropriate attire, young man." As the children gathered their slates and primers, Clara consulted the list she'd compiled. Millbrook's mercantile needed restocking sugar, salt, and those precious coffee beans that made early mornings bearable. More importantly, she'd heard mention of a position at the schoolhouse. Miss Peterson, according to gossip shared at the Chinese laundry, had accepted a proposal from the banker's son in Denver and would depart before winter. "Miss Clara," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "will you walk us to school?" "Today, yes. Tomorrow, you'll manage the route yourselves." The October air carried bite, promising snow before November's end. Clara had spent her emergency funds on a wool coat from the mercantile $3.20 that left her with barely $4 remaining. But Colorado winters, she'd been warned, showed no mercy to the unprepared. At the schoolhouse, a neat building with 6 windows and a properly chinked chimney, Clara paused. Through glass panes, she glimpsed children seated at wooden desks. Their attention focused on a young woman who gestured toward a map of the United States. Miss Peterson possessed the harried look of someone managing 20 pupils with insufficient resources. "You're thinking about teaching," Sarah observed with uncomfortable accuracy. "I'm thinking about many things. Papa says thinking's good, but doing's better." Clara smiled despite herself. "Your father sounds wise. He island, but he's sad most times. Mama used to make him laugh." The child's words carried weight beyond her years. Clara filed the observation away as they continued toward Main Street, where the mercantile promised both necessities and information. Inside Henderson's general store, Clara found herself in conversation with Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose talent for gathering intelligence rivaled any newspaper. From Mrs. Henderson, she learned 3 things. The strike was modest, the railroad might cut service to once a week, and Miss Peterson had resigned. "You've got the look of education about you, Mrs., Henderson observed while weighing out sugar. "Teacher's hands, soft, but strong. And you speak proper, not like some of the mining camp women." "I've had some schooling," Clara admitted carefully. "Well, the school board meets Thursday evenings at Judge Fairfax's office. They're desperate enough to consider most anyone with letters and numbers." The information felt like providence. Clara completed her purchases total expenditure, $1.60, and made her way toward the assay office, where she'd heard the judge conducted morning business. She found Judge Fairfax reviewing documents with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that hasty decisions in mining country often proved fatal. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with the bearing of a man comfortable with authority but not corrupted by it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, rising as she entered. "Thomas mentioned you might seek employment. How are you settling at the Garrett place?" "Quite well, thank you. I understand the school board seeks a replacement for Miss Peterson." "Indeed. The position pays $40 monthly during the academic term, September through May. Housing isn't provided, but the schoolhouse includes quarters if needed." His eyes assessed her with legal precision. "You'd be teaching children ages 6 through 14, subjects ranging from basic letters to advanced arithmetic and geography. Do you possess relevant qualifications?" Clara straightened her shoulders. "I completed secondary education at Mrs. Pemberton's Academy in Street Lewis. I've studied Latin, French, mathematics through calculus, natural sciences, and literature. I've also maintained household accounts and supervised younger students. Impressive credentials for Millbrook." Judge Fairfax made notes on legal paper. "The board convenes Thursday at 7 o'clock. Can you prepare a brief demonstration of your teaching methods?" "Certainly." "Excellent. One additional matter, Thomas has spoken of formalizing your domestic arrangement with proper documentation. Might I suggest we address both matters Thursday evening?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. The efficiency of small-town communication never ceased to amaze. "That would be appropriate." As she prepared to leave, Judge Fairfax cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, you should know that Thomas Garrett is among Millbrook's most respected citizens. His wife's death affected the entire community. The children, well, they've been adrift. Your presence has been noted, and favorably so." "Thank you, Your Honor." Walking home, Clara felt the weight of possibility and responsibility in equal measure. The marriage certificate still rested in her reticule, signed by a phantom groom who'd never materialized. But perhaps, in this high mountain town where silver dreams met harsh realities, she might write a different story entirely. The mine whistle blew 12 times as she reached Prospect Street. Soon Thomas would emerge from underground darkness, hungry for both food and news of his children's day. Clara quickened her pace, already planning the evening meal and the conversation that would follow. The abandoned bride in white was learning to become something more useful, a woman with purpose, skills, and the growing certainty that some destinations proved better than their intended journeys. Behind her, the church bell chimed once 12:30, time enough to prepare for whatever came next. The kitchen lamp cast warm light across Thomas's weathered hands as he signed the employment agreement Judge Fairfax had prepared. His signature, careful script, learned in better times, made their arrangement official. Clara Whitmore, domestic supervisor and governess, employed at competitive wages with clearly defined responsibilities. "There," Thomas said, setting down the pen. "Legal and proper." Clara folded the document carefully, noting the precise language that protected both parties. Yet something in the air had shifted during their negotiations. Thomas had insisted on 60 cents daily rather than her requested 50, and he'd added a clause about additional educational services as mutually agreed language that felt like hope disguised as contract terms. "Miss Clara," Sarah called from the parlor, "come see what Jacob built with his blocks." They found the boy constructing an elaborate miniature town, complete with mine shafts represented by wooden tunnels and a church topped with a carefully balanced triangle block. His attention to architectural detail impressed Clara. The child possessed natural engineering instincts. "It's Millbrook," Jacob explained proudly. "But better. See, I made the houses bigger and put in a real school with lots of windows. And a bigger church," Sarah added, "for when more families come to town." Clara knelt beside them, studying the imagined community. "What's this building here, with the tall chimney?" "A factory," Jacob said. "Papa says mines don't last forever, but people always need things made. Maybe furniture or tools or something important." The child's wisdom startled her. At 6, Jacob Garrett already understood economic realities that escaped many adults. Clara glanced at Thomas, who watched his children with an expression of mingled pride and concern. "You're raising philosophers," she said quietly. "I'm raising survivors," Thomas replied. "This country demands nothing less." Later, after the children had been tucked into bed with stories and prayers, Clara found herself alone with Thomas in the kitchen. The intimacy felt different now, not improper, but weighted with possibility. The employment contract created boundaries, but it also established partnership. "Clara," Thomas said, and her name sounded different in his voice. "May I speak freely?" She nodded, though her pulse quickened. "You came here expecting marriage to a stranger. Instead, you found employment with a widower and his children. I want you to know that whatever hopes I might harbor, they don't affect your position here. You're safe, respected, and welcome for as long as you choose to stay." The words carried both reassurance and invitation. Clara understood that Thomas Garrett was a man who kept his promises, but also one capable of deeper feeling than their formal arrangement acknowledged. "I appreciate your honesty," she said carefully, "and I want you to know that I've come to care for Sarah and Jacob as if they were my own. Whatever the future holds, they'll always have my devotion." Thomas smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "They love you already. Sarah told me yesterday that you smell like Mama's soap and laugh like music. And Jacob, he's building again." He stopped after Mary died, just sat and stared at walls. Now he's creating worlds. Clara felt tears threaten. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel secure. "Yes," Thomas agreed. "And so are adults, given proper encouragement." The mantel clock chimed 9 times, marking the end of another day in their carefully structured household. But as Clara climbed the stairs to Sarah's room, she carried with her the sense that something fundamental had shifted. The employment contract was signed, but the real agreement, the one written in shared glances and children's laughter, and the gradual intertwining of daily routines that document, remained unfinished. In her borrowed room, Clara unpacked the marriage certificate she'd carried from Denver. The paper that had once represented hope and desperation now seemed merely curious evidence of a journey that had led her to exactly where she needed to be. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season. Winter would test them all, but Clara no longer feared the cold. The Garrett house had become a place of warmth, purpose, and the quiet magic that transforms strangers into family. She folded the certificate away, not discarded, but transformed, no longer a symbol of abandonment, but proof that sometimes the wrong door opens onto the right path. The church bell counted 10 times across the snowy town, and Clara Whitmore slept peacefully, dreaming of children's laughter and a man whose gentle strength had shown her that belonging could be chosen, not just stumbled upon. The blizzard struck on a Tuesday morning as the mine whistle blew its warning at 5 o'clock sharp. Clara woke to wind that howled like something wounded, driving snow against the windows with artillery force. Through frosted glass, she could barely make out the shape of Henderson's store across what had become a white void. Thomas appeared in the kitchen as she built up the fire, his face grim with calculation. The mine's closed today. Winds strong enough to knock a man flat, and visibility's down to maybe 10 feet. Nobody goes anywhere until this passes. Clara felt relief and concern in equal measure. Thomas would remain safely home, but their supplies, carefully rationed through October, might not stretch if the storm lasted more than 2 days. She'd learned enough about Colorado weather to know that early-season blizzards could rage for a week. "How much food do we have?" she asked, moving to inventory the pantry. "Flour for maybe 4 days of bread. Coffee for 3. Salt pork and beans to stretch it, if we're careful." Thomas pulled on his heavy coat. "I'm going to check the woodshed and see about the neighbors. Mrs. Kowalski lives alone, and the O'Briens have that new baby." The morning passed in domestic industry, punctuated by the storm's fury. Clara taught the children arithmetic using dried beans for counters, turned thin soup substantial with dumplings, and mended clothes by lamplight, while wind rattled the house like dice in a cup. Sarah and Jacob adapted to confinement with surprising good humor, building ever more elaborate cities from blocks and books. But by afternoon, Clara sensed tension beneath the cozy domesticity. Through the kitchen window, she glimpsed figures struggling through the storm. Men moved between houses with purposeful urgency. This was more than social calls. Thomas confirmed her suspicions when he returned from his rounds, snow crusted to his eyebrows. Doc Matthews needs help. The O'Brien baby's taken sick, and Mrs. Patterson went into labor 2 weeks early. Doc can't get between houses safely alone. What can I do? Clara asked immediately. Stay with the children. Keep the house warm and the coffee hot. Men will be coming and going. This storm's bringing out the worst in folks, but also the best. For the next 6 hours, the Garrett house became an informal headquarters for Millbrook's weather emergency. Clara served coffee and soup to a steady stream of visitors. Judge Fairfax coordinating relief efforts, Henderson tracking supplies, and Dr. Matthews grabbing moments of warmth between medical calls. The Patterson woman's having troubles, Dr. Matthews confided during one brief stop. Baby's positioned wrong, and she's small-built. I could use someone with steady hands and a strong stomach. Clara felt duty pull against prudence. I've assisted at difficult births. My aunt was a midwife in Street Lewis. Thomas, overhearing, shook his head firmly. The storm's worsening. You can't navigate between houses in this wind. Then bring her here, Clara said simply. This house has the largest kitchen in town, plenty of clean water, and good light from 3 windows. If Dr. Matthews can get Mrs. Patterson here safely, I can help deliver her baby. The decision made itself. Within an hour, Clara found herself converting the kitchen into a makeshift birthing room, while Sarah and Jacob huddled in the parlor with strict instructions not to emerge. Mrs. Patterson, a young woman barely past 20, arrived, supported by her husband and Dr. Matthews, her face twisted with pain and fear. Now then, Clara said, taking charge with authority she discovered only in crisis. Dr. Matthews, you'll need hot water and clean linens. Mr. Patterson, there's coffee in the pot and chairs by the fire. Your wife needs calm voices and confident hands. The birth proved long and difficult, but Clara's steady presence and practical knowledge made the difference. She guided Mrs. Patterson through breathing techniques learned from her aunt, assisted Dr. Matthews with positioning, and maintained the careful balance of encouragement and honesty that difficult labors demanded. At 9 o'clock that evening, as the church bell somehow managed to chime through the storm's roar, Mrs. Patterson delivered a healthy son. His first cry filled the kitchen with triumph, and Clara felt tears of exhaustion and joy slip down her cheeks. Well done, Miss Whitmore, Dr. Matthews said quietly as they cleaned up. You've got natural instincts for this work. Ever consider medical training? Clara smiled, thinking of the teaching position that awaited school board approval. I believe I'm discovering my calling, Doctor, though perhaps not in medicine. As the Pattersons prepared to return home, the storm finally abating, Mrs. Patterson grasped Clara's hands with surprising strength. I'll never forget what you did tonight. Neither will anyone else in this town. You saved my baby's life. Later, as Clara scrubbed blood from her fingernails and Thomas banked the fire for the night, she reflected on the day's transformations. She'd arrived in Millbrook as an abandoned bride seeking refuge. Now she was becoming something else entirely, a woman the community turned to in crisis, whose competence and compassion had earned respect that no marriage certificate could have provided. You were magnificent tonight, Thomas said softly. Mary would have admired your courage. The compliment struck deeper than any flowery praise. To be compared favorably to his beloved wife, to earn that honor through her own actions, felt like the highest recognition possible. The storm's ending, Clara observed, noting the wind's diminished force. Yes, Thomas agreed. And tomorrow we'll see what's changed. As Clara climbed the stairs to her borrowed room, she carried with her the certain knowledge that tonight had marked a threshold. The abandoned bride in white had become Clara Whitmore, integral member of Millbrook's community, trusted with its most precious moments. The marriage certificate lay forgotten in her drawer, superseded by bonds far stronger than legal documents could create. Outside, the snow continued falling, but gently now, not a barrier, but a benediction on a night that had transformed strangers into family and a refugee into a cornerstone. The church bell tolled 11 times, and Clara slept the deep sleep of someone who had found her place in the world through service, courage, and the gradual accumulation of small daily choices that built into something magnificent. The school board convened on the first Thursday in November as the evening bell at the Celestial Mine rang 7 measured times. Clara arrived at Judge Fairfax's office carrying her demonstration materials, a slate covered with mathematical problems, a worn copy of McGuffey's Reader, and the confidence earned through weeks of teaching Sarah and Jacob at their kitchen table. 5 men comprised Millbrook's educational authority: Judge Fairfax, Henderson from the Mercantile, Dr. Matthews, mine foreman Pete Sullivan, and Reverend Morrison. They sat behind a scarred oak table that had witnessed countless municipal decisions, their faces bearing the careful neutrality of men accustomed to disappointing worthy applicants. Miss Whitmore, Judge Fairfax began formally, "Please demonstrate your instructional methods." Clara had prepared for this moment. She began with penmanship, proper letter formation that built to words, then sentences that told stories. Next came arithmetic presented as practical problems. If ore wagons carry 200 pounds each and the mine produces 6 tons daily, how many wagon trips transport the full load? Her demonstration peaked with recitation from memory Longfellow's Psalm of Life, delivered with the passion that made literature breathe. "Impressive," Dr. Matthews murmured when she finished. "Your credentials exceed anything we'd hoped to find in Millbrook." But Pete Sullivan, the mine foreman, frowned. "What about discipline? These mountain children can be handful. Half of them speak better with fists than words." Clara met his gaze directly. "Children respond to expectations, Mr. Sullivan. Set standards high, provide tools for success, and enforce consequences fairly. I found that respect earned through competence lasts longer than fear imposed through force." "Easy words," Sullivan replied. "But what happens when young Billy Henderson decides your arithmetic lessons less interesting than tormenting the smaller children? Or when the Thompson girl refuses to speak English because her family prefers German at home?" The questions struck at Clara's deepest concerns. She taught only Sarah and Jacob eager, well-mannered children who wanted to learn. A classroom of 20 might present challenges requiring wisdom beyond her years. "Then I'll discover solutions through trial and necessity," she said honestly. "I won't pretend to know everything, gentlemen, but I'll promise this. Every child in my classroom will leave more educated than they arrived. That's the compact I'll make with this community." Reverend Morrison leaned forward. "Miss Whitmore, there's been talk about your circumstances. You came here expecting marriage that didn't materialize. Some folks wonder about your stability, your likelihood of remaining long-term." The question stung, but Clara had anticipated it. In communities like Millbrook, reputation mattered more than credentials. "Reverend, I abandoned a comfortable life in Street Louis to answer an advertisement for marriage to a stranger. That decision might seem impulsive, but it required enormous courage. Now I found something better than the security I originally sought: purpose, community, and the chance to build something lasting. I'm not running from Millbrook, gentlemen. I'm running to it." The board members exchanged glances, weighted with unspoken communication. Judge Fairfax cleared his throat. "We'll need references beyond your own testimony. Thomas Garrett has offered to speak for my character," Clara replied. "As has Dr. Matthews, based on our work during the blizzard. Mrs. Patterson has written a letter attesting to my competence under pressure." "You helped deliver the Patterson baby?" Henderson asked, surprise coloring his voice. "I assisted Dr. Matthews. The mother and child are both healthy." More glances. Clara sensed the mood shifting, though she couldn't determine the direction. "Miss Whitmore," Judge Fairfax said finally, "would you wait outside while we deliberate?" The hallway outside the judge's office felt cold, despite the pot-bellied stove that glowed in the corner. Clara paced between wanted notices and legal announcements, her footsteps echoing off wooden floors. Through thin walls, she heard the murmur of male voices engaged in debate, but couldn't distinguish individual words. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the door opened. Judge Fairfax emerged, his expression unreadable. "Miss Whitmore, please rejoin us." She entered to find 5 faces that revealed nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for their decision. "The position is yours, Judge Fairfax announced, contingent upon satisfactory performance through the remainder of the academic year. Salary, as discussed, $40 monthly during the school term, with the possibility of permanent appointment based on results. Relief flooded through Clara's chest. Thank you, gentlemen. You won't regret this decision. One additional matter, Dr. Matthews interjected. The school board has decided to increase the position's responsibilities. We'd like you to organize evening classes for adults, basic reading, and arithmetic for minors' wives, English instruction for our German and Chinese families. Additional compensation of $15 monthly. The offer stunned Clara. Not only had she secured employment, but they'd expanded her role beyond anything she dared hope. I'd be honored to serve the community in that capacity. As she prepared to leave, Reverend Morrison stood. Miss Whitmore, I officiated at your intended wedding ceremony. At the time, I felt sorrow that you'd been abandoned. Now I wonder if Providence had different plans. Sometimes our greatest disappointments open doors to our true calling. Walking home through Millbrook's quiet streets, Clara felt the weight of transformation. The abandoned bride in white had become Clara Whitmore, schoolteacher, valued member of a community that had chosen to trust her with its children's futures. At the Garrett house, she found Thomas waiting in the kitchen, his expression anxious. How did it go? I got the position, she said simply. Full teaching responsibilities, plus evening classes for adults. Thomas's smile could have lit the entire room. Clara, that's wonderful. The children will be so proud they've been telling everyone in town about their teacher who lives with them. The words carried implications neither of them was ready to address directly. Clara lived with them, yes, but under what arrangement? Their employment contract had been practical necessity. Now, with her position secure and her place in the community established, the terms of their relationship required reconsideration. Thomas, she said carefully, I need to find proper housing. A schoolteacher can't continue living in a student's bedroom, especially when people are already talking about our arrangement. His face fell. Of course. I hadn't thought. You'll want independence, respectability. I'll want what's appropriate, Clara replied, though her heart ached at the disappointment in his voice. The school provides quarters if needed. Cold, lonely quarters, Thomas said quietly. Clara, I know this complicates everything, but I have to say it, I don't want you to leave. Not for propriety, not for appearances, not for any reason except your own desire. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Clara felt the pull of possibility and the weight of responsibility in equal measure. Thomas, Miss Clara! Sarah burst through the kitchen door, followed closely by Jacob. Papa, did she get the teaching job? Please say she did. I did, Clara confirmed, kneeling to receive Sarah's enthusiastic embrace. I'll be your teacher at school, just like I am at home. Will you keep living here? Jacob asked with 6-year-old directness. Clara met Thomas's eyes over the children's heads. We'll see, sweetheart. Changes take time to sort themselves properly. But even as she spoke diplomatically, Clara knew that some decisions couldn't be delayed indefinitely. The community had accepted her as their teacher, but her living situation would require explanation that satisfied both propriety and her own growing feelings for the man who'd offered sanctuary to an abandoned bride. The church bell tolled 9 times, marking another milestone in Clara's unlikely journey from refugee to cornerstone of Millbrook society. Outside, November wind whispered promises and warnings in equal measure, but inside the Garrett house, warmth and belonging made all complicated futures seem possible to navigate. The Christmas pageant crisis struck on a Monday morning when the mercury barely reached 10 degrees above zero. Miss Everett, the retired teacher who'd volunteered to direct the annual school Christmas program, collapsed with pneumonia just 3 weeks before the performance. As the church bell tolled 8 times, marking the start of another school day, Clara found herself facing 20 pairs of eyes that reflected equal measures of hope and panic. Miss Whitmore, said Billy Henderson, the mercantile owner's precocious son, what happens to the pageant now? We've been practicing for months. Clara surveyed her classroom crude scenery, painted on old sheets, costumes sewn by determined mothers, and musical arrangements that required more enthusiasm than skill. The Christmas pageant was Millbrook's premier social event, drawing families from camps miles away. Cancelling would disappoint not only her students, but an entire community starved for celebration in the harsh winter. "We'll continue as planned," she announced with more confidence than she felt. "The pageant will happen on Christmas Eve, exactly as Miss Everett intended." The next 3 weeks blurred together in a frenzy of rehearsals, costume fittings, and scene construction. Clara discovered that organizing a community theatre production required skills no teaching college had covered: diplomacy to navigate competing maternal visions, engineering to construct a stable manger scene, and musical direction for children whose voices ranged from angelic to enthusiastic. Thomas and his children threw themselves into the project with infectious energy. Jacob proved surprisingly talented at carpentry, constructing wise men's gifts from scrap lumber and mining equipment. Sarah's clear soprano made her a natural choice for the angel announcing Christ's birth. Even Thomas, initially reluctant to participate in what he termed theatrical nonsense, found himself painting backdrops after his shifts at the mine. "You've got the whole town mobilized," Judge Fairfax observed during one particularly hectic rehearsal. "Haven't seen this much community spirit since the Silver Strike of '89. But with 5 days remaining before the performance, disaster struck again. A late-season blizzard buried Millbrook under 4 feet of snow, making travel impossible for the rural families who'd planned to attend. Worse, the church heating system failed, leaving the performance venue freezing cold and potentially dangerous for children and elderly audience members. "We'll have to cancel," Dr. Matthews said grimly during an emergency meeting in Clara's classroom. "Can't risk pneumonia in half the town for the sake of a children's program." Clara felt 20 disappointed faces turned toward her, waiting for adult wisdom that would somehow solve the impossible. The marriage certificate in her desk drawer seemed to mock her. She'd come to Millbrook seeking security, only to find herself responsible for an entire community's Christmas hopes. "Then we'll move the pageant," she said suddenly. "The schoolhouse is warm, and we can rearrange the desks to create performance space. It won't be as grand as the church, but—" "Miss Whitmore," interrupted Mrs. Henderson, "the schoolhouse holds maybe 40 people. We're expecting twice that number." Clara's mind raced through possibilities. "Then we'll perform it twice. Christmas Eve afternoon for families with young children, Christmas Eve evening for everyone else. The children can manage 2 performances if it means not disappointing anyone." The solution sparked immediate debate. Some parents worried about exhausting the young performers. Others questioned whether splitting the audience would diminish the community spirit the pageant was meant to foster. But Sarah Garrett, 8 years old and wise beyond her years, ended the discussion with characteristic directness. "Mama always said Christmas was about making room for everyone," she announced from her angel costume. "If the church can't hold everybody, then we'll make the school work. Angels can sing anywhere." The next 4 days transformed Millbrook into a hive of determined activity. Men who'd spent their lives extracting silver from reluctant mountains applied those same skills to converting a one-room schoolhouse into a functional theater. Women whose fingers ached from sewing in lamplight created costumes that rivaled anything Denver's Opera House might produce. Clara found herself working 18-hour days, directing rehearsals, coordinating logistics, and somehow maintaining regular lessons for children who could barely contain their excitement. Thomas appeared each evening after his mind shift, tools in hand, ready to solve whatever crisis had emerged during the day. "You're magnificent," he told her on the night before the performance as they hung the final backdrop, a starry sky painted by the entire community on canvas donated by Mr. Chen. "Mary would have loved seeing you bring everyone together like this." The compliment, invoking his beloved wife's approval, struck Clara more deeply than any declaration of love. But before she could respond, Jacob tugged at her skirt. "Miss Clara, I can't find my wise man crown anywhere." The crisis, one of dozens that evening, sent Clara scrambling through costume boxes and prop collections. She found the missing crown under a pile of angel wings, its cardboard construction slightly crushed but still serviceable. As she adjusted the gold paint and paper jewels, Clara realized this was precisely where she belonged. Solving problems, nurturing children, building community one small crisis at a time. Christmas Eve arrived with crystalline clarity. 20 degrees below zero, but brilliant with sunshine that turned snow-covered peaks into cathedral spires. The first performance began at 2 o'clock, with families crowding into the transformed schoolhouse like observers at a mining claim recording. Clara watched from the back as her students performed the nativity story with earnest concentration. Jacob delivered his wise man's speech about gold with the gravity of someone conducting actual mining business. Sarah's angel voice filled the cramped space with celestial authority. Even Billy Henderson, notorious for classroom disruptions, played Joseph with convincing devotion. But the moment that stopped Clara's breath came during the final scene. As the cast gathered around the makeshift manger, baby Jesus, represented by the O'Brien infant born during October's blizzard, Mrs. Patterson stood and began singing Silent Night in German, the language of her childhood. Other voices joined. Chinese words from the laundry owner's family, Spanish from the Mexican miners, English from longtime residents. The schoolhouse filled with Christmas expressed in multiple tongues but unified by shared hope. When the afternoon performance ended, Clara felt tears on her cheeks. This was what she'd unconsciously sought when she'd answered that marriage advertisement, not just personal security, but the chance to build something larger than herself. The evening performance proved equally moving, attended by miners still carrying traces of underground dust, women wearing their finest dresses saved for special occasions, and children whose eyes reflected both exhaustion and triumph. As the final notes of the closing hymn faded, spontaneous applause erupted, not polite acknowledgement, but genuine celebration. Miss Whitmore, Judge Fairfax, announced as the audience began to disperse, "The school board has asked me to make a brief statement." Clara's stomach tightened. Public announcements at community gatherings usually meant either recognition or termination. "Your performance as our teacher has exceeded every expectation," the judge continued. "Your dedication to these children, your service to this community, and your leadership during challenging circumstances have convinced us that Millbrook has found its permanent educator. The board is pleased to offer you a 5-year contract, with salary increased to $60 monthly plus housing allowance." The announcement sparked another round of applause, but Clara barely heard it. 5 years. A commitment that transformed temporary employment into genuine belonging. She'd found not just work, but calling. As families began bundling children into coats and preparing for cold walks home, Thomas approached with Sarah and Jacob flanking him like miniature escorts. "Clara," he said quietly, "might I speak with you privately?" They stepped outside into air so cold it crystallized breath into visible clouds. Above them, stars shone with the clarity possible only in high mountain country, far from city lights that dimmed celestial glory. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding proper housing for a schoolteacher," Thomas began, his words creating small puffs of vapor. "You're right that appearances matter in a small community. A woman of your position deserves respect and independence." Clara's heart sank. She'd hoped their growing closeness might lead to different conversations. "However," Thomas continued, "I've also been thinking about what Sarah said during the pageant crisis, that Christmas is about making room for everyone. And I've realized that I don't want to make room for you in my life, Clara. I want to share my life with you entirely." He paused, reaching into his coat pocket. "I know this isn't the romantic proposal you might have imagined. We're standing in sub-zero weather after managing 20 excited children through 2 Christmas pageants. You're exhausted. I'm covered in paint from backstage scenery, and my children are probably watching through the schoolhouse window." Clara laughed despite her nervousness. "It sounds perfectly appropriate for us." "Clara Whitmore," Thomas said, producing a simple gold band that caught starlight. "Will you marry me? Not for convenience or propriety, but because I love you and can't imagine facing another day without you as my partner in all things." The proposal hung in the frozen air between them, not the desperate arrangement she'd once sought. It was something far more precious, a choice freely made by 2 people who had discovered love through shared purpose and daily devotion. "Yes," Clara said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if crafted specifically for her hand. Then he kissed her with the gentle passion of a man who'd learned that the best gifts often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. "Miss Clara! Mr. Papa!" Sarah's voice carried clearly through the schoolhouse door. "Are you getting married?" Because Jacob and I vote yes. They separated, laughing at the children's directness. Through the window, Clara could see Sarah and Jacob pressed against the glass, their breath fogging the panes as they watched this crucial adult negotiation. I believe we have unanimous approval, Thomas observed. From the most important voters, Clara agreed. As they walked back toward the schoolhouse to collect the children and begin the short journey home, Clara reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. The abandoned bride in white had become Clara Garrett, teacher, community leader, and beloved wife, to a man who'd shown her that the strongest foundations were built not from desperate necessity, but from conscious choice and daily dedication. The church bell tolled 11 times as they reached Prospect Street, its bronze voice carrying across snow-covered rooftops to announce another day's end in Millbrook, Colorado. But for Clara, the evening marked not an ending, but a beginning, the first night of a life freely chosen and deeply rooted in the high mountain community that had taught her the difference between seeking shelter and building home. Behind them, the schoolhouse still glowed with lamplight as volunteers cleaned up from the pageant. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh responsibilities, and the ordinary miracles of mountain life. But tonight, walking home with her new family under stars that burned like promises in the crystalline air, Clara Whitmore Garrett carried with her the perfect certainty that sometimes the wrong train delivers you to exactly the right destination. The marriage certificate from her abandoned wedding lay forgotten in her desk drawer, superseded by a love that needed no documentation beyond the daily choice to build something beautiful together. In the distance, a coyote's call echoed across the valley, wild and free, and utterly belonging to this harsh, magnificent country that had taught an abandoned bride to become a cornerstone. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while. I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.